Generators are the backbone of modern civilization. We wouldn't have all this electricity around us if these generators were not invented. I have already spoken a bit about construction of a synchronous machine, which means a synchronous generator or a synchronous motor. Generally, we have field poles rotating and armature coils stationary. That way, we are a lot more comfortable in collecting large output powers because nothing is rotating on the large power side of the machine. In theory, it could be other way around also. You could have rotating armature and stationary pole, which is what we typically do for DC generators. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Good, good. Today, wait a minute. Today we are looking at synchronous generators in detail. It's a follow-up on the previous lecture where we had gone through the basic principles. Synchronous generators, as I was mentioning, are the backbone of modern civilization. You wouldn't have all this electricity around you until or unless these generators were there. We use several of them in parallel to get even higher powers than what is possible from a single such generator. Typically, we have rotating poles and stationary armature. Because large power is being generated from the armature, it's easier to connect to a stationary large power entity than to a rotating large power entity. Okay. We need to supply DC current to the field windings, and they are rotating. They are being rotated by supplying external rotary mechanical input using a prime mover. But that is possible. That's not that difficult because the current requirements for field poles are not very large. So essentially, this flux that is being produced by the poles on the rotor cuts through the three-phase windings on the stator and produces the required three-phase output. A similar thing works for single-phase AC generators also. Only thing is on the stator, instead of three-phase windings, you will have single-phase windings. Okay. You can see some actual construction here. Wait a minute. It has gone too far for some reason. Yes. Yeah, here. This is how the typical synchronous generator looks like. This is the rotor right here. It is being excited. That means it is being supplied DC by using not a DC generator in this case, but something called a brushless exciter, which is actually an AC machine whose output is rectified using diodes. Okay. And then, of course, you have the stator, which is the outer part where three-phase windings are situated. They are all encapsulated, so you don't see much from outside. Once the rotation begins, you can collect the three-phase output from the stator. Wires will be coming out for you to collect the voltage from. Yeah, this is probably. Now, I was mentioning last time that the poles can be salient or non-salient. Salient means they are physically visible. You can see that here on the rotor. They are jutting out from the outer portion. These are physically visible poles. These are known as salient poles. For low speeds, they are okay. For high speeds, they start coming off. So mechanically, it becomes a challenge. So in that case, instead of having salient poles, we have electromagnetically stimulated poles, and the rotor becomes what we call a cylindrical rotor or non-salient rotor. There are two different approaches to supply DC to the rotor. One thing is you can have an external DC generator connected, which can be rotated using the same rotary input that is coming in for the main generator. Okay. So you don't need a separate turbine for that one. Or you can have a DC power source directly connected where you need it. So both possibilities are there. A brushless exciter is not a DC generator. It is actually an AC generator whose output is rectified to produce DC. Maybe later I'll show you some schematics on this. Other method, of course, is to use a DC generator. In that case, no rectification would be required. A commutator would do the rectification for you. Okay, lot more schematics. They are showing the rectifier circuit also after the AC is generated from the brushless exciter. Okay, you don't have to memorize anything. The concept is more important. Yeah, this is what I was already showing you. Typically, this is how the machine looks like. Another way to show the machine where we are showing the entire assembly. And here it was only showing the stator and rotor. Here we are showing the housing also. The size of these machines can be very large depending on how much power you are trying to draw from the machine. Okay. There's a lot of equations available to help us out in designing the diameter, length, etc. for rotor. But right now I'm not doing all that. Of course, this theory is simple enough. Rotation, essentially, mechanical rotation produces the required frequency. The equation is F equal to NP by 120. Here the symbols are slightly different, but basically The equation is what I have already mentioned in my notes. Steam turbines are most efficient when rotating at high speed because steam turbines can generally produce much higher RPMs. So you will not need large number of poles to produce 60 hertz or 50 hertz. For 60 hertz, for two pole system, you will need 3600 RPM, which steam turbines can produce. For 50 hertz, using two pole system, you will need 3000 RPM based on this equation, which is also possible. Water turbines do not produce such a large RPM. They produce more like 200 or 300 RPM. So if you want the frequency to be 50 hertz or 60 hertz, you'll have to have more poles on the rotor. That also is doable. This equation is very useful in terms of deciding the number of poles if the RPM is known, and if frequency is known and you want to figure out what RPM you will need, or you have an idea of the kind of RPM you would like to implement. That means the nature of turbine is kind of known to you. Okay, this is an equation which you do not need right now. It's a three-phase system. You have seen such equations already. So I have given you already a formula for the RMS value of the voltage generated or EMF generated in each phase. Okay, this is the equation. I have got it in my own notes also. Lot of, in fact, two empirical constants are involved in this equation. They are dictated by the nature of winding. Now, equivalent circuit is what we should be focusing on more if we want to do analysis or design of such machines. Typically, we draw single phase equivalent circuit and then generalize the results for other phases because you know that 120-degree progressive phase shift will be there in the other phases. It could be plus 120 or minus 120, of course, depending on the sequence. Here also, we have a concept called back EMF, or if you want, you can call it armature EMF, which is the open circuit voltage generated from each phase. The equivalent circuit cannot be 100% correct for sure, but still we try to capture the reality as much as possible. The air gap between rotor and stator is not necessarily the same as rotor rotates because of mechanical reasons. So that would be a departure from idealized theoretical predictions. Inductance of the armature coils will also affect the final output voltage, and resistance of those coils will also matter. So these things need to be included in the equivalent circuit. Armature reaction is another serious issue which I had mentioned in case of DC machines also. What it means is that when rotor is rotating at a high speed or even at a lower speed, it will produce its own flux, which will kind of affect the main flux being produced. That phenomenon is not easy to model, but we typically take a ballpark value of how much reduction would take place because of armature reaction in the overall voltage and try to put that in the equivalent circuit. If nothing is given, you ignore armature reaction completely. I'll come to equivalent circuits in my own notes, so let me quickly rush through it. This is all going to be present in my own notes. By the way, since we are talking AC, concepts like power factor, real power, reactive power, complex power, apparent power, etc. will all come back to us now. And most of the calculations will be in complex domain. The equivalent circuit parameters here also are measured using open circuit and short circuit tests, like we did for transformers. I'm not going through details right now. If time permits, we'll do that. The numerical examples also are something I'm not touching right now. I'll first go to equivalent circuits, then I'll do numerical examples, including maybe these. One important thing to remember is that in practice, we have several such generators running in parallel. That introduces additional headaches. Each generator should operate exactly at the same frequency. That is what theory demands. They all should have perfectly the same phase relationship among the three phases. And they all should have the same voltage magnitude in each phase. We try our best to do that, but it may or may not work out all the time. That's for sure. I'll come to all these phase relationships, etc. later. Okay. Voltage regulation for a synchronous generator is defined almost in a similar manner in which we had defined voltage regulation from a DC machine or DC generator. No load voltage minus full load voltage divided by full load voltage and the entire thing multiplied by 100 to get the result in percentage. Only interesting thing here is that depending on the power factor of the load, you may even get negative voltage regulation. I had shown this in my own notes, and when we do numerical examples, we'll come back to that. Okay, lot of detail here. Yeah, this is a relationship which we had seen in case of DC machines as well. Power is related to omega through torque. They are, of course, using the symbol small tau for torque. I generally use the symbol capital T. Okay. So this equation is similar to what we had seen for DC machines. I know I'm rushing through it because I'll be doing all this later in detail in my own notes. So this is done almost. The idea here was to show you the 3D pictorial diagrams for the construction of DC machine, or construction of synchronous generators. Another good document is this one. Again, I don't know if I know the author. Yeah, actually, I know the author. Yeah, Dr. Shaji, Shahil, whatever. He has prepared very good document on synchronous generators. Again, there is no point going through each and every line carefully. I want you to get an overview before I go to my own notes. Synchronous machines, obviously, are all pervading. Our society fully depends on them. Synchronous generators and synchronous motors both are popular. Currently, my focus is synchronous generators. Prime mover, as I was mentioning last time, can be either a turbine or it could even be a diesel engine. It could even be a DC motor, as far as I know. Nobody stops you. Turbine is a particular example of a prime mover. Prime mover is the general term used for the entity which is supplying the required rotary mechanical power to the generator. And turbines are the most commonly used prime movers. They can be water turbine or hydel turbine. They can be wind turbines. They can be steam turbines. They can be gas turbines, and so on. Steam turbines and gas turbines usually produce much higher RPM of the order of 3000 or even 3600, while water turbines and wind turbines produce a lower value of RPM, few hundred typically. As I was mentioning so many times in the past, that in theory you could have rotating field and stationary armature, or rotating armature and stationary field. For large powers, rotating field is a better technique from implementation point of view. So these two classification methods are given again in this document. Again, a lot of detail in terms of construction. I think we have seen all this in other documents. So let me move forward. Again, a pictorial diagram of stator alone. Once stator is built, you bring rotor in and fit it in. That's how things are done. Laminations are used throughout, like we were doing for transformers, so that core losses are reduced. And there are large number of slots on the stator to house the three-phase windings. That's what they are showing here. As far as the rotor is concerned, again, it is made of iron core for sure, and it is laminated for sure. There are slots in it, and on that, you can have copper bars or wires if you don't want to have a salient pole construction. If you want salient pole construction, then you will build poles on them. You will weld poles, physically seeable poles on them, on the rotor. Shafts are quite long. They're very heavy for large power applications. So typically they are made in several pieces, and then these pieces are put together. Shaft and rotor, actually. I'm not saying shaft alone. It is the rotor which will have to be built in several different pieces, and those pieces are brought together finally. Shaft is the one which is on the left side. It is connected to the turbine, and then it rotates the rotor, which is in the center of the stator. Salient poles means so poles are normally bolted to the shaft. Actually, not to the shaft, they are bolted to the rotor. Shaft's job is to rotate the rotor. Each pole has DC winding. I think we have gone through all this several times. For cooling purposes, obviously, a fan would be needed. At least minimum requirement is that. Methods of excitation, we have already gone through it. So let me quickly move forward. Again, there is a lot of detail here. You may not be able to connect to everything. I know that. So rather than understanding everything, at least get the top level picture clear in your head that DC exciter could be a DC generator, or it could be an AC generator with rectifier, diode based rectifiers after the AC. Ventilation is a serious issue. In my own notes also, I have spoken about it. You see similar information here also. Hydrogen is preferred over air for cooling in many cases. I hope some of you will seriously apply for jobs in electricity boards or National Thermal Power Corporation or Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, etc. Each companies are looking for electronics engineers too, all the time. because a lot of control mechanisms are there where electronics is essential, and programming skills are also needed nowadays for smart smart machines all the time. The shortage of people interested in this field. Everybody wants to go for software or semi-software kind of jobs right now. Yeah, same famous equation once again. I'll be doing all this later, so let's ignore math. Yeah, this is roughly the equivalent circuit. I'll also show it in my own notes. Single phase equivalent circuit essentially means a back EMF followed by armature windings resistance in series with armature windings reactance in series with the effect of armature reaction, which is modeled approximately by putting an extra inductance in series, XAR. So equivalent circuit is not that difficult. Okay, we'll be solving problems based on this soon. And field winding, of course, is shown as as a separate entity. It has its own DC input, which is putting field current in and producing the required rotating flux. Yeah, forget all this. We'll be doing all this soon. This numerical example, I think, is solved in my own notes also, so I'll be skipping it for now. Yeah, power angle is a very interesting word in synchronous machines. It means the phase angle between this back EMF, EG, I call it EB, they are calling it EG or EA, and the terminal voltage. The phase difference between these two phasors is called power angle. Some people call it torque angle. Okay. Essentially, as load changes, this power angle keeps changing to maintain the sanctity of Kirchhoff's voltage law in the complex domain. Armature reaction, very complicated topic, but normally it is sufficient to put an extra reactance in the equivalent circuit to account for armature reaction. Okay. Again, open circuit tests and short circuit tests are possible to experimentally determine the equivalent circuit parameters, RA, XA, etc., etc. If time permits, we'll go through them. Otherwise, we'll ignore the topic for now. These documents will be useful for you to keep for future possibilities. You don't have to do everything given here, but capture the essence. Voltage regulation, this famous definition is repeated here again. Fine, no issue. I was mentioning last time that voltage regulation in case of AC machines is mentioned along with the power factor of the load at which you carried out the calculation or did the experiment. It is not enough to say voltage regulation is 5% to 10%. You always have to say at what power factor, and also the nature of the power factor, whether it's leading power factor or lagging power factor. All that is critical. Lot of examples. I'll be doing something similar in my notes. AC machines actually require almost a full course by themselves. Anyway, you don't have time of that kind in this course. Okay, a lot of numerical examples. Don't get scared. We will not be doing everything here. Okay. It's a very detailed document. Yeah. Okay. hope it is finishing soon. Oh, boy. This goes on and on. Yeah, it's done. Good. Now let me jump to some numerical problems and some discussion on equivalent circuits once again in a simplified manner, hoping that you have understood at least something about the basic construction of synchronous generators. The first set of solved examples are actually not even talking about synchronous generators. They are more regarding fundamentals of ACC. Look at question 1. Believe it or not, such questions are asked in GATE, GRE, etc. You don't need to know anything about synchronous generators to try to attempt question 1. But this basically is testing your understanding of the basics. What is the equation of a 25 cycle voltage sine wave having an RMS value of 30 volts? RMS, okay. That is first sentence. What is the value of this voltage when the time is 0.005 second? Second part. What fraction of a cycle has the wave gone through in 0.005 second? Third question. Assume that the wave crosses the axis, the time axis, in a positive direction when the time is equal to 0. Everything given to you is essential. Without that, you won't be able to figure out the equation for this voltage, this AC voltage. Frequency is given as 25 cycles, so time period will be 1 upon 25 seconds, whatever is that. I'll show you the solution in a minute. Okay. The RMS value is 30 volts, so peak value will be 30 multiplied by square root of 2. You know all this, I'm sure. On top of it, they are telling you that the instantaneous value is 0 and the voltage is increasing when you are hitting the t equal to 0 point. Let me show you the solution. F is 25 cycles per second. Vrms is 30 volt. So V max will be 30 into square root of 2 volts, which is 42.42 something volts. Okay. Omega is 2 pi f. So it is 50 pi radian per second, which is 157.08 radians per second, approximately. So the equation will be peak value multiplied by sine of omega t. Now, one very important thing here is the last sentence. Assume that the wave crosses the time axis in a positive direction when the time is equal to 0. How do you ensure that? The derivative of small v with time should be positive when t is 0. If you're not sure, think about it a little bit. Okay, so this is the correct answer, I think. If you have objections, we can always go back to it. The fact that I have not put a negative sign on the right-hand side of small v means I'm conforming to this last statement, I think. Anyway, assuming that that equation is correct, what is the rest of the story? What is the value of this voltage when time is 0.005 seconds? So that is easy to figure out. Once you have the equation, it's a matter of substituting small t equal to 0.005. So it turns out to be 30 volts. You can check it out. And the next question is, what fraction of a cycle has the wave gone through in 0.005 seconds? So that means you need to know the time period first. Time period is 1 upon 25 seconds, which is 0.04 second. So full time period is 0.04 second. And in 0.005 seconds, what fraction of the cycle has been completed? That is the question. So you take the ratio, 0.005 divided by 0.04, which gives you 1 by 8. So 1/8 of the cycle has been completed when small t equal to 0.005 second. Okay. Next question, let's repeat question 1 by assuming that the wave crosses the time axis in a negative direction when time is equal to 0. Here you will have to put minus sign in the beginning to ensure that the gradient is negative at t equal to 0. Everything else is unchanged except the minus sign, nothing changes. You can figure out the answers based on that. Okay. Now question 3, more practical. A 60 cycle alternator means synchronous generator. A 60 cycle alternator has 2 poles. So capital P equal to 2. What is the speed of the alternator? Here we go. F is 60 cycles per second, P is 2. And we know the formula F equal to NP divided by 120. From there, you figure out N. 3600 RPM is the answer. This equation has a lot of practical implications, Smaller number of poles will demand higher RPM for the same frequency. That means you will have to have a different kind of turbine. All the calculations are not difficult. It is the implications which are worth consideration in terms of implementation. So question 3 is a very simple answer. For producing 60 cycle frequency from an alternator with 2 poles, you have to rotate the rotor at 3600 RPM. Simple enough. Okay. Now suppose I changed, because 60 hertz is done in the US. In this country, we produce 50 hertz. So for 50 hertz, you can easily do the calculations. You will get 3000 RPM. Okay. $50 divided by 2 will give you 25. So 120 into 25, I think will give you 3000 RPM. Yeah. So even in India, the turbine will have to be able to give at least 3000 RPM. In the US, it will have to give 3600 RPM for a 2-pole generator. Next question, a 60 cycle alternator has a speed of 120 RPM. How many poles has it got? Okay. Basically, we are playing with the same equation. Here, F and N are given, so you use the equation in a different manner, and you get number of poles equal to 60, very large. Because the speed is very low, it's only 120 RPM. So number of poles will have to be large for 60 hertz signal to come out. Question 5. An AC generator has 6 poles and operates at 1200 RPM. What frequency does it generate? Okay, simple enough, I think. You can do it. At what speed must the generator operate to develop 25 cycles or 50 cycles? So it is basically playing with the same equation. I don't think I have to show you solution fully, it's there. Okay. These are the answers for various questions. And the last problem, let's see, what does it say? How many poles are there in a generator that operates at a speed of 240 RPM and develops a frequency of 60 cycles? Okay, this is also based on the same equation. Solution is right here. It has got 30 poles. Okay. So it's all these problems are basically twisting the same equation this way or that way. Next question is more interesting. And I may not have given you all the equations that I'm going to be using in the solution. Read it carefully first. I'll give you 1 minute. This is more close to real life scenario. It's a single phase AC generator, it seems. It's not a 3-phase generator. That's what I feel. The effective voltage, that means RMS voltage, of a 5-turn coil in a 6-pole AC generator is E effective equal to 10.6 volts. The flux per pole is phi equal to 0.00795 Weber. Calculate the speed and frequency of the machine. Now, here is one equation which I have not proven anywhere. I've taken it from sources where the proof is given. The average value of the voltage generated per conductor on the armature side. Each coil turn has 2 conductors, okay? We are not considering the wires which are joining the 2 conductors. We are considering only the main wires. With that assumption, the average value has been shown to be related to the effective value by this equation. 1.1 is an empirical factor that is used to make the equation more realistic. So based on that, I get the average value of volts per conductor. Okay. Then another equation is there that the time period of the signal that is generated is related to the flux per pole by this equation. Again, I'm giving it to you without proof, okay? But it's good to be aware of the equations that are used by engineers and real life. So from there, you figure out the time period. And then frequency is easy to figure out. You are getting almost 60 hertz. And N is very easy to figure out from there because number of poles is given. So everything else is simple enough. The last question in this document is for the machine considered in question 7, write the equation for the voltage per coil assuming its waveform is sinusoid. That is not difficult because once you have figured out F, omega is 2 pi into F, F is 60.6 hertz. So this equation is easy to figure out. Okay. RMS value is 10.6 volts. So 10.6 multiplied by square root of 2 is the peak value, and the rest is very easy to figure out. I'm assuming that the gradient is positive at t equal to 0. Now the next set of problems is this one. Here first I'll discuss the equivalent circuit of this synchronous generator in a sense that I'm sure you will be able to relate to. Some repeated statements here. DC current in the field winding, which is field winding is situated on the rotor. That current produces the moving flux. G has been missed out in scanning. Okay. Let us call that flux phi F. Phi F induces a back EMF. I'm calling it EG actually in my notes. In the 3-phase Oh yeah, three-phase delta or Y armature winding. The three-phase winding is on the armature, which is stationary. It can be delta winding or Y winding, right? So that flux, which is rotating, cuts those windings and produces the three-phase output. I'm basically describing the operation once again in simple words. And open circuit voltage coming out from the three-phase windings will be what we call back EMF. And let us use the symbol E capital G rather than EB. Now EG establishes an armature current, which I'm going to call IA in the armature, depending on the load connected. If load is not connected, IA will be zero for sure, right? And load can be a complex value in general. Now IA produces its own flux. This is where the trouble begins. And that flux is phi AR, let's say. And that is known as armature reaction. For small machines, phi AR is almost negligible. Don't worry about it. But for large machines, its effect needs to be considered when determining the overall performance of the machine. So the EMF generated by armature reaction, which I am going to denote by EAR, is added to the back EMF generated EG. This is a complex summation, okay? To get the total voltage, which we are going to call E resultant. And even if you don't want to talk about E resultant, the other method which is normally used is to represent the effect of armature reaction by a lumped approximate reactance value called XAR. The typical equivalent circuit for an alternator, and this is drawn single phase basis, is what is shown here. Back EMF, EG or EA, whatever you want to call it, followed by a series combination of the hypothetical XAR, which is essentially including the effect of armature reaction, plus the reactance produced by the armature winding XA, and plus the resistance produced by the armature winding RA. And of course, then load ZL will be there. On the left side, you see the field represented by a symbolic diagram. Unless IF changes, EG will not change, that's for sure. In fact, in my own notes, I have given you a formula for EG, and you see flux per pole there, and flux is determined by IF. But if IF is not changing, you can almost ignore the left part completely. These are the various parameters in the equivalent circuit. XAR is the reactance due to armature reaction. If nothing is given about armature reaction, you can assume XAR to be zero by default. XA is the reactance. Self-inductance will be there for the armature conductors. So XA will essentially mean 2 pi F LA, where LA is the self-inductance of the armature winding. And RA is the resistance of the armature winding, per phase, of course. So once you have drawn this equivalent circuit, circuit theory kicks in. It's very easy to write the equations from there. EG will be EG minus VT. VT is the terminal voltage, okay? EG minus VT, all in complex domain, will be equal to IA multiplied by RA plus JXA plus JXAR. In fact, it is common to represent XA plus XAR by what we call synchronous reactance of the machine. And we give it a symbol X with small s. XA plus XAR is normally given a single name called XS. I don't know whether I have mentioned it here or not. Yeah, here. Actually, I mentioned. Good. Okay, so equations are not that difficult. And this is all done for phase A, let's say. For phase B, EG would become the same value with minus 120-degree phase shift or plus 120-degree phase shift, depending on the sequence. And for phase C, you'll have minus 240-degree or plus 240-degree phase shift. That's it. So the analysis can be done primarily on a single phase basis. We are, of course, assuming balanced system. XS is XA plus XAR. Now power angle, now I'm mentioning it here. Power angle is the angle between VT and EA phasors. I'm using both symbols EA and EG because books, depending on where you look, can use either of them. In some books, they insist on using EB, taking a clue from DC generators. But most of the books nowadays avoid the term EB for AC machines. They rather use EG or EA. As I said, depending on the load, IA would change. And every time IA changes, this poor guy, delta, the phase angle between VT and EA will keep changing to adjust to the reality. Now, some numerical examples. A 3 phi means three phase, okay? A 3 phi, 5 kVA, 208 volts, 4 pole, 60 hertz, star connected, synchronous generator SG has negligible stator winding resistance. That means RA is 0. That's given. And a synchronous reactance of 8 ohm per phase. That means excess is given, not individual values of XA and XAR, but total is given. And it's all per phase, of course. 8 ohm, okay? At the rated terminal voltage. Of course, it will keep changing with the load, but let's say at the nominal rated value of load, which is 5 kVA, 208 volt combination, okay? Determine the excitation voltage and the power angle. Excitation voltage means EG. But they are not saying that EMF here. Determine the excitation voltage and the power angle, which is delta, the phase angle between EG and VT, when the generator is delivering rated kVA at 0.8 power factor lagging. Power factor is given, its nature is also given. It's lagging power factor, that means IA will be lagging compared to VT. Okay. And kVA, of course, means complex power, actually apparent power, which is the magnitude of the complex power. And draw the phasor diagram for this condition. Okay, let's see how we tackle this. Read it once again carefully. Okay. Draw the equivalent circuit to begin with. There is no resistance in the equivalent circuit, and XA and XAR total is given. So single phase equivalent circuit is not bad at all. EA with a J8 ohm reactance in series, and then VT. Simple enough. That's the equivalent circuit. You should never make a mistake. Yes. Otherwise, everything else will go wrong. Based on what is given to you, draw the equivalent circuit correctly. Next, what do we do? Remember, it's a three-phase machine. What you are given is line voltage, magnitude, and it is star connected machine. You know that for star connection, the line voltage divided by a square root of 3 gives you phase voltage. That's what I'm doing here. For a single phase equivalent circuit, you cannot use 208 volt directly. That's the line voltage. You will have to use EA equal to, VT equal to 208 divided by square root of 3. If I had given you delta system, delta machine, then this would not have been necessary, because for delta systems, the line voltage and phase voltage are the same. You may have to go back to three-phase discussions in case you are not sure. So read this very carefully, whether it is star-connected machine or delta-connected machine. Based on that, the value you use for EA will be either 208 volt or 208 divided by square root of 3. And this, of course, gives you about 120 volt. All voltage and current values by default are RMS value. Now, the rating is 5 kVA. And power factor is 0.8 lagging. So magnitude of IA will be kVA divided by VT divided by should we just be careful here a little bit. 5,000. In fact, if you recall, I had told you this is the kVA rating for the three phases together, not one phase. Okay, so we got to interpret this very carefully. The total power rating of a three-phase system is always square root of 3 VL IL cos phi. You may have to go back to the notes if necessary. And the kVA rating is simply square root of 3 VLL IL. And of course, for star connected system, IA and IL are the same. So based on that, I have calculated IA 5,000 divided by square root of 3 VLL. When we are saying kVA, that means cos phi is assumed to be 1. kVA means maximum possible value of the power that you can get, assuming unity power factor. So kVA is 5,000. Actually, it is VA, which is 5,000, divided by square root of 3 VL or VLL if you want. That gives you the IL value, line current value. And for star connected systems, line current is same as phase current. That's how IA has been determined. Phase current is same as line current, which is equal to VA divided by square root of 3 VLL. You may want to revisit this if you're not sure. This calculation requires careful thinking. Once IA is determined at the operating condition given, which is the rated condition, I suppose, now the calculations begin. The magnitude of armature current or stator current is so much, but actually it is a complex value. This current is lagging compared to VT. with a phase angle which will be cos inverse of 0.8. Okay. In fact, I have calculated power factor angle right there. Cos inverse of 0.8 is about minus 36.87 degrees. So actual current, actual IA will be 13.88 with a phase angle of minus 36.87 degrees. That is the complex value for IA. Right here. Now you are in a position to determine EA. We would assume that VT has 0 degree phase angle. That is the reference voltage. VT plus IA into J8 should give you EA, and calculations need to be done in complex domain. EA is 120 plus IA into, and J8 means 8 with an angle of plus 90 degrees, right? Then the calculations. I hope I have not made any mistakes in these calculations. Because two values are being multiplied, I've converted both of them in polar form. Actually, IA is known in polar form anyway. XS in polar form is 8 with an angle of 90 degrees, plus 90 degrees. So multiplication will become 13.88 into 8 with an angle of plus 90 degree minus 36.87 degrees, which is 53.13 degrees. You convert the result back into rectangular form and then add 120 to it to get EA in rectangular form. And then, if necessary, you can convert the result back into polar form. In fact, you will have to do that because they want you to calculate the power angle also, which is the phase angle between EA and VT. That can be known only when you do the conversion to polar in the value of EA. EA turns out to have a magnitude of 206.69 volts and a phase angle of plus 25.45 degrees. So this is the power angle. And this is the excitation voltage. The phase angle of EA is the power angle, delta, small delta. Of course, then I have not drawn the phasor diagram. I think you can easily draw it, It's not that difficult. VT will be shown as a horizontal line, and the drop across J8 ohm will have to be sketched based on the value of whatever value of this factor, 13.88. Actually, this value, 13.88 into 8 with a phase angle of 53.13 degrees. So try to draw that. And then 120 degree will be the horizontal line. Add these two, you should get EA. I have not done it, but it should not be too difficult. Now, second problem. For the generator in problem 1, calculate the voltage regulation. It's not that difficult, I hope. No load voltage will be simply the magnitude of EA, 206.69 degrees. Full load voltage is 120 volts. So the voltage regulation is right here. It's bad, really bad. 72%. Nobody will accept it. We have a lot of variation in output voltage from no load to full load. Something has to be done to improve the situation for sure. But anyway, we got what we got. In the engineering world, when you get bad news, you always put numbers on it, saying, okay, it is bad, but not that bad. So I will say it's not 100% at least. It's better than 100%, right? So 100% could be a nightmare, I know, but okay, we'll do something. What typically people do is they shout at the person who's connecting the load, the customer. I mean, they say, okay, you improve your power factor. Point is, it's too bad. Our system is having a very bad regulation. But anyway, leave that for now. Right now, let's look at only the calculations. So we got what we got, okay? Repeat problem one, assuming 0.8 power factor leading. Now, suppose everything is repeated with leading power factor. What will happen? What will happen is a lot of things will be unchanged. The only difference that you will see is that the value of IA will have a phase angle of plus 36.87 degrees, not minus 36.87 degrees. So with that change, repeat calculations. This is what I've done here. The result, assuming that no mistakes, the result is astoundingly different. Changing the power factor from lagging to leading gives you a very different value of EA. 103.63 volts with a power angle of 59 degrees. In the previous case, we got power angle of plus 25.45 degrees, and the EA value was 206.69 volts. Drastic change. That's why I've been telling you again and again that power factor plays a very important role in the performance of the alternator. Now, voltage regulation for this case, it is not that bad. No load voltage is 103.63 volts. Full load voltage is 120 volt. But if you do the calculation, you get negative voltage regulation. That means full load voltage is higher than the no load voltage. Very unnatural, it seems, but that's the way it is. Experiments have confirmed this, theory is predicting it. For leading power factor, generally, full load voltage is higher than no load voltage. I had shown it through a sketch in my own notes in the previous class as well. And the magnitude of voltage regulation is not that bad. It is 13.6%. Not perfect, but much better than 72% that we got in the previous case. Now, obvious question will be, which you cannot solve in a problem like this. For that, you need to have some MATLAB program. The obvious question will be, what is the optimum value of power factor of the load for which voltage regulation will be 0? It's a research challenge. It's an optimization problem. Using these equations, program them, and then run an optimization technique to figure out the minimum possible regulation and the corresponding power factor of the load. Open challenge. Simulation tools are around to help us resolve such issues. Of course, even if you come up with the optimum power factor value, customer may still not be able to implement it. You will have to help him out. Customer, had large amount of appliances connected to your system. He doesn't know what. He is not a technical person most of the time anyway. You simply say power factor is bad. He will not even know what you are talking about. He'll say, are you asking more money or what? That is what he is concerned with, that you are asking more money from him. So you have to help the customer. Most of the power engineers are actually aware of this, that customer needs to be educated. He should be told how to improve power factor in the factory. At home, generally, it's not a big issue anyway. because power requirements in homes are not that large. Even poor power factor we can live with. But for industry, poor power factor means a lot of headaches for power system engineers. I would say my gut feeling is that at least zero point 0.9, whether leading or lagging, must be brought in, 0.9 power factor. But it may be a poor guess also. Unless we do calculations, we will never know. Okay. So this is done. Now, synchronous generators are one thing. You reverse the operation, you get synchronous motor. That means you supply AC input, three-phase AC input, and supply DC to the rotor, you will see rotation. And that rotation will happen at a constant speed, which is called synchronous speed, NS, and which is governed by the same equation, F equal to NP divided by 120. So synchronous motors essentially are not that different from synchronous generators, but the functionality is reversed. And one unique feature they have is that they run only at a constant speed. Either you operate them at that speed or they simply stop. And they need two inputs, one DC input to the rotor and the other three-phase input to the stator. Basically, F equal to NP divided by 120, right? So NP divided by, so 120 F divided by P is the synchronous speed, where F is the frequency at which you are supplying three-phase input to the stator, and P is the number of poles. Now, here also rotor can have salient poles or it can be a cylindrical rotor, like we saw for synchronous generators. And DC is required, etc. All that is necessary for sure. Other problem with this motor is that it does not start by itself. You need to supply initial rotation to it, then it will start. What happens is you supply three-phase input to the stator, which produces a rotating flux inside the stator. Then you have your own rotor, which is also producing its own flux, which is not rotating because it's a motor. You are not going to rotate the rotor. In fact, you want rotor to rotate so that you can use that mechanical rotation for driving mechanical systems, right? So here, what is happening is the three-phase supply to the stator produces a rotating magnetic flux inside the stator. Then you have the rotor, which is not rotating, but it is producing its own flux, which is fixed, not rotating. These two fluxes don't like the situation. The flux of the rotor, which is not rotating, says, I want to rotate also. That is the conservation of energy. So this poor guy tries to rotate. Unfortunately, the inertia of the rotor will not allow instant pickup of the speed. By the time rotor tries to move because of its flux behavior, the polarity of north and south pole produced by the stator flux has changed, because that is changing very fast. So now the rotor tries to move in the opposite direction. And by the time it tries to go in the opposite direction, the polarity of the stator flux has changed again. So rotor now tries to move in the other direction. The ultimate result is that rotor, because of its inertia, is unable to rotate. It is trying to catch up, but the stator flux is continuously changing polarity at a very high speed. So rotor starts making a sound like something like this. It's not able to rotate. What you need to do is give it an initial push, either mechanically or through some other means, to get it started once. Once it starts, it is able to pick up speed, and then its flux aligns with the main flux produced by the stator. And within a very short time, you will see constant speed rotor. This machine is very interesting actually. There are niche applications where you need constant uh, speed, and no other motor would work except synchronous motor. Although the fact remains that it needs two inputs, etc., there are niche areas of application where only this motor will be able to solve the problem. Okay. Anyway, there's a lot more here. Equivalent circuit of this machine can also be done in a, yeah, here is the synchronous speed, 120 F divided by P. This is the speed you will get from the rotor once you have been able to get it started. F is the frequency at which you are supplying the three-phase input to the stator. P is the number of poles on the rotor, which is either salient poles or electromagnetically simulated poles. So in fact, there is a small example here. The speed of a 24-pole synchronous motor operating at 60 hertz would be very easy to calculate, but try to capture the reality from the practical point of view. You are getting a low speed motor for this case. If you want to increase the speed, the number of poles will have to be reduced. Okay. It is possible, and we'll be doing it next time. It is possible to draw an equivalent circuit for a synchronous motor also. It's possible to carry out a lot of interesting calculations, including torque generated, etc., etc. And power angle concept remains valid here also. In case of motors, people generally call it torque angle. But I know it is essentially the same thing. The phase difference between EA and VT is what is known as power angle. Of course, here it's a different thing. VT would be the input, and VT minus IA into JXS will give you EA. In case of generators, it was EA equal to VT plus J times XS IA. In case of motors, it is VT equal to EA plus J XS IA. I'll draw the equivalent circuit next time if you're not sure about it. Yeah. Other thing is the implementation of rotor. Let me spend 2 more minutes, okay? The implementation of rotor, as it is right now, is depending on DC input being supplied to it. And that's a disadvantage, although in many cases you have to live with it because constant RPM is being produced by the system. Another leap of faith taken was that you maintain the same stator, but in the rotor, you short circuit all the conductors. And that results into what we call induction motor. I'm not talking about it today, but that's a very interesting variation. In fact, it's not synchronous motor at all because it runs at a speed which can be controlled. So induction motor essentially means synchronous motor where rotor has no DC input, but its conductors are all short circuited at the two ends. That is induction motor. Induction motor can be single phase and three phase both. In your homes, the fans that you are using are all using single phase induction motors.